Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Wonderful to see everybody here this morning. Today's shir is actually related specifically to today's daf, but like we mentioned in the past, it's not something you have to be learning daf yomi to be able to follow. It's not something which is intricately involved in today's daf, and I'll hope to be able to give enough information to you to be able to understand the shir and everything about the shir, even if you're not somebody who's currently following the daf yomi cycle. That being said, for those who have participated in daf yomi shiurim that I have given, especially on Masechtas like Bava Kama, you may have noticed that sometimes I get a little bit sidetracked on talking about some of the topics that we come across in daf yomi, and that's because this Masechta, specifically Masechtas Bava Kama, the truth is all Masechtos, they have practical applications to halacha, and there's a lot of depth to it. On Shabbos we came across a very large Tosas that I described it as like rubbernecking as we talked about some of the issues that were in that Tosas. We couldn't actually be involved in the scene and really learn the whole Tosfos, but ultimately we couldn't just walk by without at least looking to see what was going on in that Tosfos. So today's shir is going to be one of those opportunities for us to really dive a little bit deeper into one of the topics that come up in daf yomi and be able to walk away with something, an understanding of how these halachos actually become relevant, how they're practical, maybe with a deeper understanding. The topic we're talking about is grama b'nizaken. Grama b'nizaken literally translates as when one causes damage. Masechta, for the most part, Bava Kama, for the most part, talks about when a person or a person's property damages. So, very straightforward. A person goes ahead, hits somebody very hard, causes physical damage, emotional damage, loss of employment, all kinds of embarrassment, all kinds of other things that come along with that. That's straightforward. It's a Mishnah which tells us what the halacha is if a person physically harms somebody else. As well, if a person breaks someone else's property, a person takes a baseball bat and whacks it through somebody's front window of their car, it's straightforward. You understand the person caused damage. Adam mu'ud la'olam, a person's always responsible for their actions. And then we have extensive discussions of what happens if your property causes damage. And that's the beginning of the Masechta, Arba Avos Nazikin. We talk about what happens if your animal causes damage. And you'd be quite surprised to know that actually with increased dog ownership, there are lots of cases that come to Beis Din where people have to figure out how to take responsibility for damages that their animals have caused. And again, that's also pretty straightforward. Where things get a little bit complicated is where I don't actually cause damage. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. Where I don't actually damage, but I cause damage. And I don't sit on a Beis Din, but I have the opportunity to be in touch with Dayanim often enough, or to talk to people who are in Beis Din. What I will tell you is that many of the cases that come to Beis Din are not straightforward cases where a person went out and deliberately caused someone else damage, took a baseball and threw it through their window, or other cases where it's clear a person's responsible for the damage. A lot of the cases that will come before a Beis Din, which need a psak, which need a hora, which needs Beis Din to actually issue some type of ruling on whether or not the person's going to be responsible and for how much they're going to be responsible, many of those cases are actually related to cases of grama, where a person was involved in a business deal or involved in some type of interaction where they did something, and as a result of something that they did, there was a damage or a loss of money that someone else incurred as a result of their actions. So what I'd like to do is take you through a little bit of expository, a little bit of an expose on this sugya, on this topic, to really go through a lot of the different makoros that take us through grama b'nizaken and help us understand the terminology and the cases where there's a chiyuv, where there's an obligation to pay, and when a person might be exempt. So let's just clarify the terms. Grama b'nizaken is the term that's always used to describe a person not having any financial responsibility. Came up in today's daf, where it says, we're comparing a case of a person adding some wind to a fire, to ignite the fire, to make it bigger. The Gemara compared it to Shabbos, and the Gemara says, you can't compare it to Shabbos. Rav Ashi actually says you can't compare it to Shabbos because on Shabbos, a grama is different than by Nizakin. By Shabbos, the halach is we always try to determine what was your intention. However, when it comes to Nizakin, here the Gemara says we're talking about Nizakin, and the Gemara just says grama b'Nizakin pater. A person who causes damage to someone else doesn't actually do the damage or causes damage is going to be pater, will be exempt from any financial liability. There's something else called a garmi. A garmi, which is typically how it's pronounced, although the Levush and others actually explain it should be pronounced differently, which is grame, but maybe we'll explain that later. But garmi, as it's typically pronounced, is when the Gemara describes a person causing damage to someone else, and they are responsible. So, grama is when you cause damage and you're not responsible. Garmi is when you cause damage to someone else and you are responsible. Today what we're going to try to address is what is the difference between a grama and what is a garmi. How do you define a grama, which is simply causing someone else damage, and garmi, which is also causing someone damage, again, indirectly, but there is a financial responsibility. I should point out, even if we're going to say grama b'nizakin pater, there's two things to understand. Number one, the Gemara does tell us very clearly that even though there's no financial obligation that the Beis Din can actually impose upon you in a court of law, however, chayiv b'din shemayim. A person has to realize you're ultimately responsible for this person's loss of money, and therefore there is some type of moral liability, moral responsibility, and again, you're better off making that payment than paying the person in this world and having to take care of it b'dei shemayim. That's number one. Number two, we're not going to get into this today, we're not going to have time for this, but grama doesn't have a uniform set of laws across all areas of halacha. Today's Gemara is a perfect example. Shabbos has a very different set of halachos with regard to grama. Isser v'heter also has different set of halachos with regard to grama. There isn't a one-size-fits-all halacha with regard to grama, and that means it's not a given that just because grama is not responsible in a Beis Din when it comes to financial responsibilities, it's not a given that a person's allowed to be goreim a malacha to happen on Shabbos. That's a discussion for another time. If you notice on page number 1 of the handout, basically what I did is I just kind of prepared like a little bit of like a shopping list of a number of cases where the Gemara tells us very clearly that a person is not financially responsible. I'm not going to go through every one of the cases because it's going to be exhaustive to do that, but I basically just prepared a list. A lot of it comes from the Gemara that we learned at the beginning of this week, at the beginning of Hakones, where at the beginning of Hakones, Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis, the Gemara lists 4 cases. Number 1, destroying a fence in front of an animal. So again, what did you do? You destroyed the fence. Or let's just say you opened the fence. If you opened up the fence, there's no damage that you've actually done, but you created a situation where now all the animals can go out and cause damage. Number 2, you place grain in the path of fire. Now, if I take someone else's grain and put it in the path of fire, I didn't burn it, but now when the fire is going to move along that path, it's going to get burnt. Next, hiring false witnesses. And I'm not going to go through all the details of these cases. We did this in Daf Yomi. But again, hiring false witnesses. I wasn't the one who testified falsely. I wasn't the one who was responsible for money being extracted from one person and given to someone else, but I facilitated it. I hired someone, therefore I caused the person to lose money. The 4th case, withholding critical testimony. I know for a fact, because I witnessed something which would be able to set the record straight. If I would report that information to Beis Din, I would set the record straight, and therefore the person who is legitimately owed the money will get the money, and the person who doesn't deserve the money will not have the money. But I decided, you know what? I'm not going to report that testimony. Now it happens to be that there's an Issa Midoraisa, as the Gemara tells us, of Imlo Yagid V'Nas Avono. If a person knows testimony and withholds it, they violate an Isser. But with regard to the financial responsibility from that person to the one who lost money, that's considered a grama, and a person is not chayiv. Just again, to quickly run through the rest of the cases, you disqualify purification water. So again, you don't necessarily physically damage the water, but you use the mechatas. you use water which makes it get disqualified for its purpose. Number 6, placing poison before an animal. Again, I didn't poison the animal ate it on its own, but I was the one who caused it. Number 7, giving fire to an incompetent person. You give fire to a person who's not responsible, who's unable to make good decisions, and they burn down a house. Again, I didn't burn down the house, but I caused it. Again, that's that word was spelled wrong. Frightening somebody. Frightening somebody is where, again, there's no physical damage. Maybe there's trauma. Maybe something else happened as a result. But I did not physically cause any damage. In the last case, 9, leaving a mess in public. So again, talking about a case where it doesn't meet the criteria of a bar, of a halachic bar. But again, I place something in public which causes someone else to be damaged. All those cases, the Gemara tells us there's no financial responsibility. A Beis Din will not extract money from a person. However, there is a chiyuv b'dinei shemayim. Now, on page number 2, you'll see there are 4 cases where the Gemara actually does tell us that there is financial responsibility for causing someone else damage. What's case number 1? Case number 1 is destroying someone else's promissory note. So I take a shtar. A person has a contract that says in it that person A owes person B money, and that really is the only way of substantiating that loan. The person cannot prove without that piece of paper that the other person owes them money. And what I do is I take that paper, I rip it up into 1,000 pieces, and I throw it into the garbage. Now it can't be salvaged. Now the person has no way to collect the money. Now, did I steal money from somebody? Did I do something to actually take money out of someone else's hands? No. But the Gemara still tells us, the man did da'in dina de garmi, magbi be dame shtarim alya. Everybody agrees I have to pay him back for the value of the paper. How much does the paper cost? Let's say it was an expensive paper. It will cost 2 cents. Okay? There's not so much value to a piece of paper. But do I have to pay back the loan? Now the person has an inability to collect the loan. They can't go to a court and show that this person owes them money. The person will deny it, and the person can't collect the loan. The halacha is, the Gemara tells us, yes, you have to actually pay back the loan. You are directly responsible for this person not being able to collect the loan because you tore up the promissory note. Point number 2, pointing thieves to someone else's property. What's this talking about? So it's a Mishnah, and it's extensive. But again, the simple case is that there are people, thieves come along, and they threaten him. He didn't do the theft himself, but he points thieves to someone else's property and says, yeah, that's my property. Okay? So what he ultimately does, if you look at Rashi says, Shalai gazlahu atzmo, el shama mi beis hamelech shemavakshin ligzal sados, the hero lahem tulu karkazu shal ploni. These thieves come, they're stealing people's property, and in order for me to save my own property, I point them to someone else's property. The thieves take it, the person loses their property. Again, did I steal it? No, I didn't take anything. However, I am directly responsible for another person losing their property. Case 3, misleading someone else about the value of a coin. So this is an interesting case. We'll just read it together. Rish Lakish presented a dinar to Rabbi Lazar to assess it. He went to him. Again, it's not talking about a case where the coins are mass-produced like our coins, and we're talking about real metals, and therefore they would often get deformed. They would lose their value. So he presented a dinar to Rabbi Lazar to assess it. Rabbi Lazar said, it is a proper coin. It's fine. It's worth the value. Now, why did he do that? He did that because he was about to make a sale. Someone came over to him and said, here's a coin. I'd like to buy whatever merchandise you're selling. Here's the coin. Now, if that coin is worth full value, it's a good sale. If that coin is not worth full value, then you know what happens? He got ripped off. Because when he goes to use that coin in another purchase, the person's going to say, I'm sorry, that is an invalid coin. I'm not accepting it. So he sold something, basically sold something without getting paid. So it might be a mekach tos, but let's just say that the person is gone. Right? The person, he's in a public store. You can't track down the person. The guy went on. So now, what he did was, he asked, so Rish Lakish presented a dinar to Rabbi Lazar to assess it. Rabbi Lazar said, it is a proper coin. Rish Lakish said to him, realize that I'm relying on you. Okay, he said, I'm relying on you to actually validate the value of this coin. So he asked him, why are you saying that to me? What's the purpose of stating that? Is it so that the dinar, if the dinar is later found to be bad, I'll be required to exchange it for you with a good dinar? And he went back and forth with this discussion, but ultimately, at the end, the last paragraph, Rish Lakish said to him, no, I intended to say that this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and we do hold in accordance with his opinion. In other words, if you tell me that a coin holds a lot of value, and I make a sale based off of your advice, then if it turns out the coin does not hold the value, you are responsible to reimburse me for that value of the coin. Because I made a sale based off of your advice. This is Ein Lecha Grama Gedola Mizu. There's no case of causing damage more than this. The person didn't damage him, he didn't steal from him, but he gave him bad advice. And as a result of the bad advice, the Gemara says he's obligated to pay him back. The fourth case is abandoning a partition between forbidden plant mixtures. There's a halacha of klayim, klayikarim, and therefore, we're not going to get into all the halachas of klayim, but if I have plants that are growing near your plants, and if those plants were to grow together, it would create a forbidden mixture, the way to save it is by having a fence there. If my fence gets knocked down and I don't rebuild it, then plants go on their own, they grow together, your plants become asur, you can't eat them because they're klayim. The halacha is, I, the owner of the fence, am obligated to reimburse you for the value of your plants because I allowed my plants to grow into your area and to create a forbidden mixture. Again, it's a grama. I didn't do it, I just caused it to happen. So we have what seems to be an interesting set of stiros over here. We have a number of cases on page 1 where the Gemara tells us that if you cause damage, you're not held responsible financially in a beis din. And then we have on page 2 a whole laundry list of cases where if you cause damage, you are responsible. What is the difference between these cases? So I want to take you through the Rishonim. I'm going to start with page 3. And Rashi tells us something very, very interesting, which is actually a fascinating Rashi on today's Gemara. Rashi tells us, you know why? Rav Ashi tells us that Grama b'nizakin pater. Rashi says, Kasavar Grama b'nizakin pater. It's Rav Ashi's opinion. Simply his opinion. However, the implication of this Rashi is that although that's the opinion of Rav Ashi, not everybody agrees with this. And although you find throughout Shas a concept called Grama b'nizakin pater, causing someone else damage, you're not responsible to make the payment back. That's only one opinion. Rabbi Meir, who tells us that you're chayiv for garmi, is simply disagreeing with Rav Ashi. Something very interesting about this halach of grama, which is we don't find any drasha that tells us grama is pater. We have no source in the Torah that tells us that if you cause someone else damage, that you're going to be pater. It's not like there's a pasuk that says you have to do it by yourself. When we darshan, it has to be an asiyah, and it's not a full action. It doesn't exist. It's a svara. It seems like it's a svara that Rav Ashi uses to say damage is when you damage somebody, not when you facilitate damage, not when you cause damage. It's simply the halacha. When you actually damage someone, you have to pay. When you cause damage, you don't have to pay. But there's no source for it. So guess what? According to Rashi, that's one opinion. Rabbi Meir disagrees. And therefore, what's the difference between page 1 and page 2? Nothing. Just two different opinions. Some opinions say grama is chayiv. Some opinions say grama is pater. That's the way Rashi learns it. And in the next source on page 3, we actually quote our Gemara. And I just added on page 3 that even those who are of the opinion that grama is going to be pater, everybody agrees you have an obligation to avoid causing someone damage. What does that mean? Let's say I created a circumstance where you are going to lose money indirectly as a result of something that I did. So I won't be held responsible if you ultimately suffer a loss. In such a case, the Gemara teaches us, which is the bottom of page 3, so Samaras Grama b'nizakin aser, and Rashi tells us, Vafilu l'man da'amar lo dayan dina de garmeu pater. Again, very interesting. Rashi clearly tells us, even to the one who disagrees and says that grama is pater. So again, Rashi is following his same logic, which is there's two opinions. One opinion says you're chayav for grama. One opinion says you're pater for grama. Rashi says, according to the one who says you're pater for grama, nevertheless, asur ligro, it's forbidden to cause someone else to lose money as a result of my actions. If a person is going to create a circumstance where someone else will be damaged by way of my grama, that person has the right to demand that I remove that dangerous circumstance. Whatever the case is. So if any of the cases that we mentioned, if it's knocking down a fence, or any of those cases, I have the right to prevent you from causing me damage, even though I can't charge you money. So again, even according to the opinion that it's pater, it's still going to be asur. That's Rashi's opinion, and I'm just going to validate that with one more source. If you look at the top of page 4, the Ramban comments on Rashi, and he says, "V'zeh shekasav afilu loman dolodoin dina degarmi eino nacha." The Ramban comments on Rashi and says, what's Rashi talking about? The one who disagrees with Rabbi Meir and says you're not chayiv to pay when it comes to a garmi. Why, says Ramban? Debein leman dedoin dina de garmi. Whether you are somebody who obligates money as a result of a garmi, or bein leman damar delo don dina de garmi, grama b'nizakin pater. Says the Ramban very clearly, Rashi, you seem to be conflating grama and garmi. You're telling me grama and garmi are all the same thing. It's just a machlokas. Says Ramban, I disagree with you, Rashi. There's two different things. One thing is a grama. That's called like a lightly causing someone else damage. Garmi is when I have like intense cause of damage. That's the way Ramban learns it. The problem just is Ramban over here doesn't really seem to explain what the difference is. What's the difference between a grama and a garmi? What will be something that will actually help a basin decide, is this case a case which is a grama, or is this case a case of garmi? And we're going to present, in the next couple of minutes, 7 different explanations of what the difference between a grama and a garmi are. Ramban, we're going to go through them quickly because I don't want to spend too much time on it, but we'll go through basically the bullet points. If you want to be ma'ayin in it, if you want to go into more depth, we'll be able to spend time later. Number 1, Ramban. He says, garmi is when the person himself did the damage. So, for example, I take your promissory note, I take a shtar, a contract that belongs to you, and I rip it. I physically ripped it. So I didn't physically steal the money from you, but I physically ripped your paper. Says Ramban, that's garmi. However, if I do another case of just simply not rebuilding my fence, maybe, or the truth is that was a case that was chayiv, placing, giving a fire to a child. I didn't do the damage. I didn't do any damage. I gave a fire to somebody. Again, if I opened up the door of a fence, I didn't cause any damage. I just opened up the door of a fence. So again, if I cause damage with my hands, even if that damage is not going to cost you a lot of money, but if I did something with my hands, says Ramban, that's garmi, that's going to be chayiv. If I don't do it with my hands, it's going to be a grama, it's going to be pater. The Rosh, he gives another one of the criteria, which is number 2, it's bound to cause damage. Sometimes I do something which can cause damage. It may not cause damage. Depends what happens. In such a case, it's a grama. It's not inevitable. However, if it's inevitable that's going to cause damage, like tearing up your promissory note, it's inevitable that's going to cause damage. In such a case, it's a garmi. There's a chiyuv. If it's not bound to cause damage, it's considered a grama, and you're pater. Number 3, the third criteria the Rosh gives is immediate damage. Does it cause an immediate damage? So, for example, if I tear up your contract, you immediately lost your ability to collect the loan. That's garmi. I open up the fence in front of an animal and it goes out and causes damage. That takes a long time. Again, we're going to find that a lot of these cases are not going to be consistent through and through. That's why there's so many different opinions that are given. But basically, that's the way he puts it down. You see the Rosh actually in Sanhedrin. The first Rosh we had was in Bava Basra. The Rosh in Sanhedrin says you have to have all 3, which is number 4, which is, number 1, in order for it to be considered a garmi and has to be and is chayiv, is obligated to make a payment, it's the person himself does it, and it's bound to cause damage, and it happens immediately. If it's lacking any one of those three criteria, says the Rosh, it's a grama, you're going to be pater. Page number 5. What's the fifth criteria? Destruction of the actual property. So again, if I were to go ahead and take your coin and destroy it, now I give back the coin to you, but I deface the coin, and now it doesn't hold the value anymore. That's going to be considered to be a garmi. Why? Because I did something to the actual property. Now, did I actually take away money from you? No, but I caused damage. Now you can't use that coin anymore to make a purchase. I give back the coin to you, but ultimately, that's considered a garmi because I defaced your actual property. I'm going to be responsible. If I do something to something else, like opening up a fence, the thing that got damaged was not the thing that I touched. That's the way the Mordechai explains what's a garmi. Yes, Ira?
What if the damage you caused results in a financial gain? If I damage something, as a result of my damaging what I damaged, you're actually making more money.
I'm not sure what that case would be. Well, you may filed an insurance claim or something?
Actually, we talked 2 weeks ago about somebody destroyed a stamp. And by destroying a stamp, he actually made more money.
Okay, I mean, obviously you can't charge him for that. You can't charge him for that. All right, number 3, the Vilna Gaon actually says something very interesting. He says the difference between Gram and Garmi is very simple. What was my intention? That's the way the Gra says it. If I had intention to cause damage, it's Garmi. So I take your promissory note and I rip it. There's no good explanation as to why I would rip your promissory note other than causing you damage. If I open the fence to your backyard, and as a result damage happened, I open the fence because I wanted to walk out. I forgot to close it. I don't have good manners. But ultimately, it doesn't mean I had intention to cause you damage. And then Tosfos actually says something, and this is the point that I want to focus on the most because I think it becomes very, very important. Tosfos actually says, V'nira l'ritzba. It's on page 5. It's by number 7. What Tosfos says is that there's no objective difference between grama and garmi, and this is very important. He says, "V'nira l'ritzba, the dina de garmi having mitam knas. It's a din midrabanan. K'demuchach b'Yerushalmi. V'lakach kol hezek matzui v'ragil. Anything that was common, it was prevalent. Kansu v'ragil lavo kansu chachamim v'tam de kansu shlo yehei kol echad holech imazek l'chaber be'en." Says the Ritzba, we're all giving all these differences in lumdus. Did I do it? Did I do it to the actual item that got damaged? Was it intentional? Was it not intentional? All these differences. Says the Ritzba, it's very nice. They're beautiful areas of lumdus. But the problem is it's not really consistent across the board. Says the Ritzba, I'll tell you the secret. The secret is, remember, there's no gezeres hakasav in the Torah that says you're not chayiv for a grama. It was a svara. It was an understanding that I'm responsible for damage that I do, not damage that I cause. However, says the Ritzba, when the damage that I'm causing is something which is common, it's prevalent, it happens over and over and over again, says the Ritzba, Chachamim came out and said we can't have a society like this, where people found a loophole how to cause other people damage, and they're getting away with it. Therefore, the cases which were prevalent and common came along Chazal, and they paskined grama is chayiv. So again, very similar to Rashi in that note. Rashi presented it as 2 different opinions. One opinion says grama is pater. One opinion says grama is chayiv. The way we describe it is grama is the term which is used by those who say you're exempt. Garmi is the term that's used by those who say you're chayiv. The Ritzba takes the same approach, but says, how did we determine what's chayiv and what's pater? We determined based on what was common and prevalent. If there was a common and prevalent problem that was going on, people were lazy. They didn't want to bother spending money to fix the fence between their backyard and their neighbor's backyard, and as a result, all types of plants were becoming klayim. Chazal said we can't allow that to happen. So therefore, they said garmi is going to be chayiv, which is a groundbreaking information. If you look on the bottom, Tosfos in Bava Kama, he says, "L'man dedon dina de garmi, nami lo mechayiv ela midrabanan." Tosfos says this very clearly in Daf Nun Daled. He says very clearly, the grama, it's a tiny little line that I pulled out of a very big Tosfos, but that's what Tosfos says. That a grama, even those who say garmi is going to be chayiv, that's only midrabanan. And it all fits very well with Tosfos' line of thinking. The whole thing is midrabanan. All these chiyuvim are midrabanan. There's a svara to say that I'm only chayiv if I do damage. However, the same svara says that if there's this situation which is going on, people are constantly causing people damage, you're going to have to be chayiv, and Chazal institute a knas for that. Interestingly, let's see how we paskin lahalacha. The Rambam tells us something very, very interesting. Top of page 6, Rambam says, surprise, kol hagorem lehezik mamon chavero chayiv l'shalim nezik shalim. The Rambam is in Hilchos Chovel Mazik, Perek Zayin, Halacha Zayin, says the Rambam, you cause someone else damage, you're chayiv. And he goes on with a bunch of cases, but ultimately the Rambam seems very clear, seems like he holds like Rashi, and we just simply don't hold of this entire notion that Grama b'ni Zaken is pater. According to Rambam, Grama b'ni Zaken is chayiv. And he takes that approach. If you look, he goes on, giving a number of cases. If you look at the Biur Agra in Shulchan Aruch, in Choshen Mishpat Siman Taf Yud Ches, again, I'm pulling out a tiny Biur Hagra from a larger sugya, but I just want to bring out this point. It's not just me who thinks that the Rambam holds that there's no such thing as Grama b'ni Zaken pater. Says the Grav HaRambam l'shitaso desfirale de lo kaimalon karav ashi de Grama pater. We simply don't paskin like our Gemara in today's daf, which says Grama's pater. Everybody knows that halacha. Everybody repeats that halacha. Everyone quotes that halacha. The Rambam just doesn't paskin like that. The Rambam disagrees. Grama actually is chayiv, according to Rambam. Furthermore, the Magid Mishnah, on the bottom of page 6, he says, Mashma de dina hu masor v'lo knasa. According to the Rambam, Grama is chayiv like any other damage. Mido raisa. It's damage. Do we care if you did it directly, indirectly? You damage someone else's property. Says Rambam, you're chayiv and you're chayiv midai raisa, according to the Magid Mishnah. How do we paskin in Shulchan Aruch? So I'm sure we're all waiting to hear that in Shulchan Aruch clearly it doesn't paskin like the Rambam. The problem just is, if you look at Shulchan Aruch, Simin Shin Pei Vav, Sif Aleph, Kaimalon, Krabi Meir, de Da'in, Dina de Garmi. Interestingly, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't even mention a grama. Doesn't mention grama. He goes straight to the opinion of Rabbi Meir and says, Kaimalon, we paskin, we are of the opinion that a person who causes damage to someone else, like Rabbi Meir, is chayiv. Now, there's a lot of room to argue and say, well, he was only talking about a garmi. And define garmi however you want to define it, he wasn't talking about a grama. But that's very interesting. You probably would want to first mention grama's pater, but garmi is chayiv. Or say garmi is chayiv, but grama's pater. He doesn't. The Mechaber completely omits the halacha of grama b'ni zaken pater. He just says, we hold like Rav Meir that garmi is chayiv. So, earth-shattering news. Grama is chayiv. It changes everything. If you look further, if you look down in the second source on page 7, says the Ramah, V'yesh omrim tezeh mikri grama b'ni zaken upater. So the Ramah actually comes out and saves us and says, you know what? You are all right. This premise that you had, the grama b'ni zaken was pater, actually is true. And says the Ramah, we do paskin that grama b'ni zaken is pater. But if you go through again, this is a very, very long mechaber in Shulchan Aruch. I can't read the whole thing. And we're going to see that, we're going to quote from the Shach in a few minutes. The Shach on this Siman in Shulchan Aruch is pages long. And there's actually, there's this tremendous amount of information. I picked through it to pick out the lines that are helpful, but I think we're going to come away with something very special over here. Says the Ramah, even though grama b'ni zaken is pater, it's underlined on page 7 in the second box, Yesh omrim, to call grama b'ni zaken, imhu davar shechiach, v'ragil, chayev, l'shalem, nishum knas. The Ramah paskins, like the Ritzba and Tosfos, that grama is pater as long as it's not a common type of damage. Once it becomes a common type of damage, we paskin that grama is going to be chayiv. Now, what's interesting about this Ramah, and the Shach points this out on top of page number 8, is that the Ramah extended the Ritzba a little farther than he went. The Ritzbah told us the reason why we have cases in the Gemara of Garmi that is Chayiv is because Chazal saw those cases as common and prevalent, and therefore, in those cases, they went ahead and imposed the Knas. The Ramah stretches this farther and says, if you are sitting on a Beis Din, if you're a Dayan, and you notice a common thread of cases, there's prevalent cases of Grama that are coming into your Beis Din, you as a Dayan have the right or the responsibility to impose this Knas. That takes the Ritzbah to another level. The Ritzbah said there is a Knas that Chazal imposed in certain cases because those cases were common and prevalent. The Ramah says, if you find a case in your society that's common and prevalent, you have to be Mechayev for Grama. The Shach disagrees with this, and he says, this is the top box on page 8. I'm going to read the second one by Chaf Daled. He says, Lashon Rav Eino Nachon, the terminology of the Ramah is not correct. Eino Nachon be'enai, Shalom Matzasi, we don't find anybody, Misha Omer b'chol Grama b'nizakin mushchiach shechayev l'sham mishum knas. We don't find anybody who says that if there's a common case of Grama, that we're going to impose a knas. Umi mapis ezo shchiach ve'ezo shchiach. Who gives one based on another based on the right to decide what's common and what's not common? There has to be an objective standard of what's common and what's not common. Therefore, the Shach says, "Aval bala svarazu hu ritzva betosis so perek lo yachbar," and he goes on to explain that the ritzva only was explaining pre-existing cases that Chazal already were mechayiv. The reason for that was because those cases were common and prevalent. But we, as a basin, don't have the right to impose this knas on cases that we feel are common and prevalent. Clearly, that's not how the Ramah paskins. Now,
can we even do knossos nowadays?
A basin. So we'll talk about basin in a couple of minutes. But again, if a basin, we'll get there in a few minutes. We're going to skip the next two sources. Maybe we'll get back to the Piskei Teshuvah soon. But on page 9, I want to just show you something very interesting, and I pulled out a number of cases from throughout Shulchan Aruch, where, and I did this with the assistance of Rav Asher Weiss. He has a tshuva on this in Minchas Asher, and it's not that I know every siman in Shulchan Aruch. He does, but I tried to find as many of the cases as I was able to. And what we find over here is something very interesting. Although the Ramah argues with the Mechaber in Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah seems to give the exemption by Grama, he seems to ignore that in many other cases. Case number 1, the case of misleading somebody about the value of a coin. Says the Shulchan Aruch, V'meino baki, he gets to another topic, whether a person's a professional or not a professional. A person's not a professional. A person comes over to him and says, could you give me, could you validate this coin? And he tells him very clearly, I'm relying on you. Chayiv l'shalim afal pishu b'chinam. Even though you're providing a free service, you have to pay the guy if you give him bad advice about the value of a coin. He says, V'husha yomer l'shulchani alechani somech. In other words, a person comes to somebody and says, I'm relying on you to validate the value of this coin. And the person tells him it's worth a lot of money, and turns out it's not, he has to reimburse him. You don't find any comment from the Ramah saying it's a grama. He should be pater. The Shulchan Aruch simply rules, you're chayiv. No comment from the Ramah. Next case. I'm going to read the case, misleading someone about the reliability of a borrower. Amar lehem b'shas matan mos. At the time that a loan was being made, halveini v'ani arev. Halvehu v'ani arev. Lend money to this person, and I will be the guarantor on that loan. Nishtabed ha'arav v'eino tzarach kinyan. The arev, the one who took responsibility, who co-signed on the loan, ultimately is responsible if the actual borrower doesn't pay back. Says the Ramah, v'afilu lo nis'arev behedya. Even if the person didn't actually say explicitly, I take responsibility for that loan, rak she'omer l'malva, he tells the lender, lahalvos la'lova ki batuachu, lend to that guy, he's a reliable guy, I'm sure you'll get your money back. Vaso al piv v'haya sheker, and he relied on him, and turns out that it was a lie, not a mistake, it was a lie. Chayiv l'shalim lo. It's as if he took responsibility. Now again, there's no bigger case of grama than this. Reuven's lending money to Shimon. He says, Shimon, you would pay him back. Levi comes by and says, I'm telling you, Shimon, most reliable guy I know. Lend him the money, you'll get your money back. He says, really? Okay, here's $1,000. Shimon and Levi walk away, say, what a joke, you just borrowed $1,000, you know you're not going to pay him back. You know what the halacha is? Says the Ramah, Levi has to pay back, because he lent him the money based on your advice. That's a grama. I didn't steal the money, I caused you to lend money to someone who's not going to pay you back. Says the Ramah, you're chayiv. What's going on here? It's a grama. Next case, defective goods. Halokech mechavero mekach. Halokech mekach mechavero. V'hodio shuma lichel medinu medinu l'machur sham. Person buys wholesale goods from someone, says, I'm going to peddle these wares. I want to sell it. V'achar shal lichel sham nitze bo mum. Turns out the merchandise was defective. Eino yachol lomar hachzer li mekchi lekan. All right, I'll give you a refund. Elamachzir lo adamim v'amocher metapel lahavi mimkaro o lamachro sham afil avro nignav hareo bershus hamocher b'mhaya mocher yodeh b'mkaro. This is the important line. B'mhaya mocher yodeh b'mkaro shahaya b'mum. If he knew in advance he was selling defective goods, chayiv b'hotzah shahotzi alokech laholech oso mekach l'makom ploni. And just finish this case. A person buys defective goods from a wholesaler. The wholesaler knows the goods are defective. The person goes ahead and tries to sell them. People say, oh, this is fake, this is garbage, this is not worth anything. He goes back to the wholesaler, says the Shulchan Aruch, the wholesaler doesn't just have to reimburse his purchase, he has to pay him back for the expenses he took to go travel around and peddle these goods. So if he bought the stuff, let's just say, he bought the stuff for $1,000 wholesale, and he spent $1,000 traveling around to try to sell it, he gets back $2,000 from the wholesaler. The wholesaler is a goreim. It's a grama. Again, we don't find any comment from the Rama over here where he says, it's a grama in your putter.
Is there any issue of lifnei iver here?
Of course. But the violating the issue of lifnei iver l'sita michshal doesn't come along with a monetary payment. Let's just get one thing straight. Grama ben Izakin is patur b'dini adam v'chayev b'dini shemayim. The person's never a tzaddik for causing someone damage. The person's always in the wrong, and they'll have to take it up with shemayim. Unfortunately, though, there are people who are not as concerned about their issues with shemayim as they are with people in this world. All these things are awesome. You're not allowed to do this. Of course there's a problem. The question is if there's financial obligation over here. Next case, backing out of a customized order. Well, it says in Shulchan Aruch, Amar le'uman, you tell a professional, Aseli davar ploni b'kchanu mimcha. Make something for me, make something for me, I'll buy it from you. Vasoa uman, the professional makes it, Yachar kach eina rotza l'kachta. He says, forget it, I don't buy it. V'udavar shim lo yikchanu miyad, yafsid. Chayiv. It's one of those cases where he can't resell it to someone else. It was a customized order. No, you go into a store, you order a sandwich, put all these very spicy sauces in it, and you make some kind of interesting mixture. Nobody else is going to want to buy that sandwich. You say, I'm not hungry right now. You walk out of the store. The halacha is, you're chayiv. Well, listen, I didn't damage you. All the meat's there, all the chicken's there, the sandwich is there, everything is fine. Says the Gra, Shal Pidi Buro, Hisid v'chayiv midina de garmi. Says the Gra, you're chayiv because of garmi. You've caused the person damage. Again, no comment from the Ramah. All these cases. Next one, this case is a little bit more complex. It's a case in Even Ezer where one party backed out of a wedding very close to the wedding. So let's just say the case of Shulchan Aruch is where the woman backs out, the kala backs out of the wedding right before the wedding. She knows that her chassan went ahead and went through a major expense to pay for the wedding, and that she knew this was going to happen. We have to understand it's not a case where there was an ones. Clearly, everybody agrees. I didn't really mention it, but the Gra says this, the Shach says this. Grandma is never chayiv by an ones. Grandma is not going to be chayiv by a shogeg. Here she intentionally did it. She waited until close to the wedding and said, by the way, forget it, I'm not showing up to the wedding. And he went ahead, spent thousands of dollars for the wedding. Halach is she has to pay him back. What does the Ramah say? Nothing. Silence. Crickets. No comment. Chakas Mechokik says, Sharei Garma lo la'abed maman. She caused him to lose money. Medama zeladini garmi, v'gam grama ben yizakin, v'davar shchiach v'ragel, chayev l'shalem mishum knas. This is not a case that comes up in the Gemara, yet in Shulchan Aruch, we're mechayev to pay the guy for the loss of money. Why? Because it's shchiach v'ragil. Why did I bring all these cases? Because I'm trying to show you, it seems like the Ramah takes the approach consistently throughout Shulchan Aruch, that when there's a common and prevalent scam going on, the halacha is, even if it's a grama, you're going to be chayiv. Rav Asher Weiss, Minchas Asher, Simon Kuf Yadalad, he writes extensively about this. I just want to read the last paragraph on page 10 to you, and then end off perhaps with some examples. He writes over here, the second class paragraph. Mikol makom nira, dekiban detzorach gadol yesh bizmanenu. Now remember, bizmanenu of Rav Asher Weiss is now. Now, this is not something which was written 500 years ago. Rav Asher Weiss, Yeshev Arichis Yamim V'Shanim, he's a posik right now. He lives in Eretz Yisrael in Ramot, and he has a shul. He paskins. He's one of the most contemporary poskim of our times, who issues halachic rulings on some of the most complex topics. He says, "The kibbutz tzarach gadol yesh bizmanenu lechazek es bidkei abayis shelo yeheya olam charev." We have to make sure the world doesn't get destroyed. V'lo loseis, this is a very important line. Lebale zroa, to bullies. Bale zroa are really strong-handed people. The inchi de lo mali, and people who are not proper. Lasos kirtzonam ulahafsid mamon zulasam, to cause other people a loss of money. Imagine this, two business partners, where a person invests money with someone. And the investor gets lazy. The investor is irresponsible. He doesn't do his due diligence before he invests the money. All those cases are grama. There's so many cases where people do business deals with people, relying on that person that they'll actually do something useful with their money, and they get lazy. Or they use the money again. If you use the money for something else, it's stealing. But in cases where you don't go ahead and actually take the money and buy something for yourself, but you're irresponsible with that money, then technically it's a grama. I'm sorry, I caused you a loss of money. I didn't steal your money, I caused you a loss of money. You invested your money in my business. Now it was all other people's money. I wasn't so motivated. I would have liked to make money. It was too much work. The whole business fell apart. Everybody lost their money. It's all grama. Says Rav Asher Weiss, how could we have a society like that, where people are taking money from other people are investing in other people, and the people just are irresponsible with other people's money? Says Rav Asher Weiss, the key mention is bara. Since we explained sheladas mechaber, yesh lechayev kol mazik ma mechaber begrama meir karadin. According to the mechaber, all gramos chayiv. Uladas Rama, according to the Rama, kansu grama b'chonezik haraga b'shchiach. Anytime there is common and prevalent damage that comes up as a result of grama, there is a knas. Mulvad devreim habrurim v'anachonim shalmudei halacha l'chobeis yisrael matzinu od achronim sheimtzu es libam. That's takanas vada baratzos hanal. He quoted before from the Sefer Beis Hillel that there was a takana from vada baratzos, which was that indeed we do impose a knas when there's a grama. Kach yesh lahoros halacha lamaisa lechayev bedina degarmi begram nezik lechaver b'pshia. Says Rav Asher Weiss, if a person is negligent with someone else's money and causes them damage, even if they don't actually damage them with their hands, and they could excuse the whole thing as a grama, says Rav Asher Weiss, what's the halacha? Chayev. A beis din should be mechayev the person. What happens lamaisa? So I spoke to a couple of dayanim about how they deal with this, and there's a few different ways that beis din deals with this. Some beis din, they use a very clean system, which is, there's a lot of paperwork to fill out before you go into beis din. And one of the line items that you have to sign on is that even if it's a grama, if the beis din feels that this is a type of grama which is irresponsible, this is a type of grama which shouldn't have happened, it was something which came, it's common, it's prevalent, it's something which really should never have happened in the first place, the beis din makes them sign, you give us the right to be mechayev you. Like this, everything's clean. The beis din doesn't have to go ahead and rely on the fact that they are passing like one opinion, they're going against the shach. You signed up front. You give us the right to be able to paskin that you're chayiv even in a grama. That's what some batei din do. Other batei din, they make a decision, again, before the litigants go into Beis Din, they ask them if they're willing to agree to some type of compromise. And if they're willing to agree to some type of compromise, when the Beis Din feels like this is an overwhelming case of a grama, this is a type of grama which shouldn't have happened, they're going to put the compromise, but most of the compromise is going to have to be on behalf of the Gorein. Again, they give the Beis Din the right to discretion to determine what the compromise is going to be. They're not going to be mechayivim all the money because it's a grama, but ultimately, since this fits with the category of the Ramah, they're going to design the compromise in the way which is going to benefit the one who is damaged. And there are other Bati Din where they take this approach, which is if they feel that this is an egregious type of grama, it's an egregious grama, the person was so irresponsible and he thought he'd get away with it because it's a grama, they're going to issue a psak halacha lamaisa. The guy has to reimburse the one who lost money completely and give back all the money that they caused him or her to lose. So that's really kind of puts a little bit of a lid on this topic. But just to summarize, while it comes up so often in Bava Kama, like Grama B'nai Zaken is pater, it's actually not so clear that that's the halacha. Grama B'nai Zaken, perhaps in a simple case of grama, a Beis Din is not going to be mechayev the person to pay. But if it's an egregious grama, in almost every case, the person is going to be responsible. He's definitely responsible b'dinei shemayim. Certainly, like was pointed out earlier, the person may have violated many other isurim. There could be which is including is giving etzah she'eino hagenes. Midvar sheker tirchak, all kinds of other yisurim could be violated. Whether there's going to be a financial obligation, it will depend on the Beis Din and depend on the circumstances. But certainly, according to the Ramah, if it's a common and prevalent case which is corrupting society, Rav Asher Weiss would say the proper thing for a Beis Din to do is actually to be mechayev for grama. Have a wonderful day.